She's not getting a dime, he said, his voice colder than the marble beneath her feet. What Julian didn't know, Amora wasn't after his money. She came for the empire he stole, and the truth that could destroy him. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this unforgettable story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll bring you another incredible tale you absolutely can't miss. Let's get started, and don't forget to like and share to help our community grow. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Whitmore Enterprises' executive suite, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where Amora Knight sat, her fingers poised over a manila folder she'd been staring at for the past 20 minutes. 3 years. 3 years of marriage to Julian Whitmore, tech mogul, venture capitalist, the man Forbes called the golden touch of Silicon Valley. 3 years of standing beside him at galas, of smoothing over his sharp edges with investors, of watching her own dreams fold neatly into the corners of his expanding empire. The folder contained divorce papers. Her signature waited at the bottom of page 17. Amora's reflection caught in the window, a black woman in her early 30s, elegant in a cream silk blouse, her natural hair styled in a low bun that had taken 20 minutes to perfect that morning. She looked composed. Put together. Nothing like the girl from Southside Chicago who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through business school. Nothing like the woman whose heart was currently cracking down the middle. Mrs. Whitmore. Amora glanced up to find Veronica, Julian's assistant, hovering in the doorway. 22, blonde, with the kind of careful deference that made Amora's skin prickle. Mr. Whitmore is ready for you in the conference room. Conference room. Not his office. Not their home. A conference room, as if this were just another business transaction. Maybe that's all it had ever been. Amora gathered the folder, her wedding ring catching the light, 3 carats of princess-cut diamond that had once symbolized forever. Now it felt like a shackle. She stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt, and followed Veronica down the corridor where Amora had once walked with pride, her ideas transforming into Julian's victories, her strategies becoming his success stories. The conference room door was already open. Julian sat at the head of the table, exactly where he'd sat 1,000 times before, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his Tom Ford suit without a single crease. At 41, he looked like money incarnate, old money, new money, the kind of money that opened doors and closed hearts. Beside him sat Richard Kavanaugh, his attorney, a shark in Armani with a smile that never reached his eyes. Amora's own attorney, Patricia Morrison, was already seated, her expression carefully neutral. They'd met twice. Patricia specialized in high-net-worth divorces, came highly recommended, and had warned Amora that Julian would play dirty. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be, Patricia had said. But nothing about this was hard for Julian. That was the problem. Amora. Julian's voice was smooth, practiced. He didn't stand. Didn't offer the courtesy of greeting her as anything more than an inconvenience. Please, sit. She took the seat across from him, the table between them as wide as the Grand Canyon. I think we can wrap this up quickly, Richard began, sliding a document across the polished surface. Mr. Whitmore has been more than generous. Generous. The word slipped out before Amora could stop it, sharp as broken glass. Julian's blue eyes met hers for the first time since she'd entered the room. There was nothing there. No warmth. No recognition of the woman who'd held him through panic attacks before his first IPO. No memory of the nights they'd stayed up planning, dreaming, building. Just cold calculation. The prenuptial agreement is clear, he said, his tone unchanged. You entered this marriage with nothing. You're leaving with the settlement we discussed. It's fair. Fair. The word ricocheted around Amora's skull. Fair was what you called something when you wanted to sanitize the cruelty of it. The apartment in Tribeca, Patricia interjected smoothly, was purchased during the marriage with joint. My assets, Julian cut in. My company. My investments. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of ease. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm being realistic. Amora was supportive during our marriage. I acknowledge that. But support isn't ownership. Something hot and volatile rose in Amora's chest. She forced it down, pressed her nails into her palm beneath the table. The marketing strategy for Whitmore Tech's expansion into emerging markets, she said quietly. That was mine. You worked for the company. Your ideas belonged to the company. Julian's expression didn't change. That's how employment works, Amora. I wasn't employed. I was your wife. And as my wife, you lived extremely well. He gestured vaguely, as if their life together was a hotel room he'd paid for. You had everything you could want. Everything except you, she thought. Everything except truth. Everything except credit for the empire I helped you build. But she didn't say it. Because 3 years with Julian Whitmore had taught her that emotion was weakness, and weakness was something he exploited without mercy. Richard cleared his throat. The settlement is $8 million, Mrs. Whitmore. For 3 years of marriage. Most people would consider that extraordinary. Most people, Amora said softly, didn't give up their own business plans to build someone else's dream. Julian's jaw tightened, the first crack in his facade. You make it sound like I forced you. No, Amora said. You made me believe we were partners. That's worse. Silence fell across the table like snow. What would you do if the person you'd built an empire with claimed you'd contributed nothing? Would you walk away, or would you fight? Patricia broke the silence first, her voice professional, detached. Mr. Whitmore, my client is entitled to a fair assessment of marital assets. The prenuptial agreement was signed under specific circumstances that were legal and binding. Richard's interruption was surgical. Miss Morrison, we've been through this. Mrs. Whitmore signed with independent counsel present. There's no duress claim here. I'm not claiming duress, Patricia said. I'm claiming that the division of assets doesn't reflect Mrs. Whitmore's actual contribution to. Contribution. Julian's laugh was brief, humorless. Patricia, let's be honest. Amora attended events. She smiled for cameras. She played the role of Mrs. Whitmore beautifully. But contribution? To a tech company? To venture capital deals? He shook his head. That's generous revisionism. The room seemed to tilt. Amora's hands had gone numb. She stared at the man she'd married, the man she'd loved, and saw a stranger. No, not a stranger. Strangers could surprise you. This was worse. This was recognition. This was finally seeing clearly what had always been there, hidden beneath declarations of partnership and late-night promises that they were building something together. The Kovac deal, Amora said, her voice steady despite the earthquake inside her chest. Zagreb. 2 years ago. You were ready to walk away because the cultural barriers were too significant. Julian's expression didn't change. I remember. I spent 6 weeks learning Croatian business customs. I built the relationship with Mrs. Kovac while you focused on her husband. I'm the one who discovered she was actually the decision-maker. I'm the reason you closed a $30 million deal. You accompanied me on a business trip, Julian corrected. Yes, you were charming. You've always been charming, Amora. But I closed that deal. With intelligence I provided. With your presence, which was lovely, but hardly. The Singapore expansion. Amora's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composure. The rebranding after the data breach. The investor pitch that saved the company when you were hemorrhaging money in Q3 of our first year married. Julian, I wrote that pitch. You helped, he said, and the condescension in that word was like acid. And I'm grateful. That gratitude is reflected in the settlement. $8 million. Amora said it like she was tasting poison. $8 million for 3 years is hardly an insult. It is when the company is worth $800 million, and half of that growth happened because of strategies I developed. Richard leaned forward, his expression sympathetic in the way predators mimic concern. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you're emotional. Don't. Amora's eyes snapped to him. Don't dismiss what I'm saying as emotion. I've sat in this building for 3 years watching men mistake competence for emotion every time a woman states a fact they don't like. I'm not emotional. I'm accurate. Amora. Julian's voice dropped, took on a tone she remembered from their marriage, the one he used when he was about to explain something to her like she was a child. You're upset. I understand. Divorce is difficult. But you're conflating being married to an entrepreneur with being the entrepreneur. They're not the same thing. She felt Patricia's hand on her arm, a silent warning. Don't engage. Stay calm. We need to be strategic. But strategy had gotten her here, hadn't it? Strategy had meant swallowing her pride. Strategy had meant watching her ideas become his victories, her work becomes his legacy, her dreams fold into the shape of his ambitions. I have documentation, Amora said quietly. Emails. Strategy documents. Meeting notes. All time-stamped, all showing my direct involvement in supporting your husband's company, Julian interrupted. Which was kind of you, but it doesn't change the fundamental reality. He leaned forward, his blue eyes cold and clear. We already divided everything according to a legal agreement you signed willingly. Whatever you think you contributed, whatever narrative you've constructed to feel better about this divorce. He paused, and Amora saw something flicker across his face. Not regret. Not even anger. Certainty. She's not getting a dime more than what's in that settlement. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward, touching everything. Patricia inhaled sharply. Richard's expression shifted into something almost triumphant. And Amora. Amora felt something inside her go very, very quiet. Not broken. Not defeated. Clear. She'd spent 3 years translating herself into a language Julian could understand. 3 years making herself smaller so he could feel larger. 3 years believing that partnership meant sacrifice, that love meant stepping back, that supporting someone meant disappearing into their shadow. And he just told her, in a conference room with lawyers as witnesses, that her shadow was all she'd ever been. Okay, Amora said. Julian blinked. Okay. Okay. She stood, gathering the unsigned divorce papers, sliding them back into the folder. I need 24 hours. Amora, the settlement is fair, Richard began. If you think delaying will. 24 hours, she repeated, looking only at Julian. You've made your position clear. I need time to make mine equally clear. Something flickered in Julian's eyes, confusion, maybe, or the first whisper of unease. What does that mean? It means, Amora said, slinging her purse over her shoulder, that you're right about one thing. We did divide everything. Your lawyers made sure of that. But there's a difference between what's legal and what's true. And I'm done pretending they're the same thing. She turned toward the door. Amora. Julian's voice had changed, lost some of its certainty. Don't do anything stupid. She paused, looked back over her shoulder. Stupid would be believing you ever saw me as anything more than an accessory, she said softly. Smart is finally believing in myself as much as I believed in you. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that sounded, to Amora's ears, like the first note of a symphony she was only beginning to compose. The elevator descended 43 floors in silence. Amora watched the numbers drop, 42, 41, 40, each one a second further away from the man she'd married, each one a step closer to the woman she'd abandoned to become his wife. Patricia stood beside her, phone already out, thumbs flying across the screen. That was a mistake, she said without looking up. Walking out. Richard will spin it as emotional instability. It weakens our position was already weak, Amora interrupted quietly. The prenup is ironclad. You said so yourself. Yes, but if we can prove undue influence, or that your contributions constituted a business partnership rather than spousal support. Can we? The elevator chimed. 37th floor. Patricia's silence was answer enough. He's not wrong about the law, Amora continued. The prenup is legal. The settlement is technically generous. And I did sign it willingly, or as willingly as anyone signs something when they're in love and believe they're building a future together. She finally looked at Patricia. You can't litigate betrayal. No, Patricia agreed. But you can litigate fraud, misrepresentation, unjust enrichment. For years. Spending money, I don't have to fight a man who has infinite resources and no conscience. Amora shook her head. There has to be another way. The elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby. Late afternoon sun streamed through the glass facade, and somewhere in the building above them, Julian was probably already back to work, this meeting filed away as just another transaction completed. She's not getting a dime. The words echoed in Amora's mind, but they no longer stung. They clarified. 24 hours, Patricia said as they walked toward the exit. What are you planning? Honestly. Amora pushed through the revolving door into the crisp October air. I have no idea. That was a lie. The apartment in Tribeca, his apartment, according to the divorce settlement, was empty when Amora returned. Julian would stay late at the office, the way he always did. Work was his religion, success his only sacrament. She'd once found it admirable. Amora moved through rooms that had never quite felt like home, touching surfaces that were too clean, too perfect, too carefully curated. This wasn't a home. It was a showroom. A display of wealth that doubled as a cage. In the study, Julian's study, though she'd spent countless nights here too, Amora opened the bottom drawer of the mahogany desk. Beneath a stack of old investor prospectuses was a leather portfolio she'd hidden 3 months ago, when she'd first sensed the marriage was ending but hadn't yet admitted it to herself. Insurance, she'd called it then. Evidence, she called it now. The portfolio contained copies. Emails she'd sent herself from Julian's business account back when they'd shared passwords, back when partnership meant something. Strategy documents with her handwriting in the margins. Meeting notes where her observations had become his directives. Recorded calls, legal in New York with single-party consent, where investors had specifically asked for her analysis, her insight, her unique perspective on markets Julian had never understood. It was 3 years of proof that she'd been more than a wife. She'd been a co-architect of an empire that bore only his name. But Patricia was right. This evidence would lead to years of litigation, leaked to the press, dissected by lawyers, weaponized by a man who knew how to control narratives better than anyone she'd ever met. There had to be another way. Amora pulled out her laptop, opened it, stared at the screen. Then she started typing. Not a legal brief. Not a demand letter. A list. Things Julian Whitmore doesn't know. 1. The Kovac deal closed because Mrs. Kovac trusted me, not him. I still have her personal number. She's expanded her portfolio significantly since then. 2. The Singapore investor group, Lee, Chen, and Patel, specifically requested I be included in quarterly updates. Julian thought they were being polite. They were being strategic. They knew I understood their markets better than he did. 3. Marcus Webb, the journalist from Forbes who wrote the Golden Touch profile, he interviewed me for 3 hours. Julian never knew. Most of the insights he praised Julian for came directly from that conversation. 4. The rebranding after the data breach wasn't Julian's idea to rebuild trust through transparency. It was mine. I have the original pitch deck. Time-stamped. With the design firm's confirmation that I was the primary client contact. 5. I know about Sophia. Amora's fingers paused on the keyboard. Sophia Loron. 26. Junior partner at the venture capital firm Julian had been mentoring. Amora had found the text messages 2 months ago, the same day she'd started building her evidence portfolio. Nothing explicitly incriminating, Julian was too smart for that, but the subtext was clear enough. Can't stop thinking about our dinner last night. You understand me in ways I didn't think possible. When can I see you again? She'd said nothing. Done nothing. Kept building her case while her marriage dissolved in slow motion. But now, Amora deleted the 5th item. She didn't need to weaponize Julian's infidelity. That was his move, using personal destruction when professional tactics failed. She'd spent 3 years watching him operate. She knew his playbook better than he knew himself. Which meant she knew his weaknesses. Julian Whitmore's entire empire was built on reputation. The golden touch. The visionary. The man who could see opportunities where others saw obstacles. And that reputation was built, in no small part, on victories that had been authored by someone else. Someone he just publicly dismissed as irrelevant. Amora closed the laptop, pulled out her phone, and scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in 2 years. Tasha Williams, Chicago Tribune. They'd grown up in the same neighborhood on the South Side. Tasha had gone into journalism, Amora into business. They'd kept in touch loosely, the way childhood friends do, exchanging messages on birthdays and holidays. But Tasha had reached out 6 months ago with a pitch. I'm working on a series about women in tech whose contributions have been erased or minimized. If you ever want to talk. Amora had declined. She'd still believed in the marriage then. Still believed Julian when he said they were partners. She pressed call. 3 rings. Then, Amora night? Girl, it's been forever. Hi, Tasha. Amora's voice was steady. You know that series you pitched me on? Women whose work gets credited to men. A pause. Then Tasha's voice shifted into something sharper. more focused. I'm listening. I want to tell you about a company worth $800 million, Amora said. And the woman who built half of it from the shadows while her husband took all the credit. When can we meet? Tomorrow morning. But Tasha. Amora stood, walked to the window overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. This isn't revenge. This is accounting. There's a difference. What's the difference? Amora thought of Julian's cold eyes across the conference table. She's not getting a dime. Revenge is emotional, she said quietly. Accounting is just making sure the numbers add up correctly. She hung up, took a breath, and pulled up another contact. Kevin Jong, TechCrunch. Then another. Jennifer Morrison, Wall Street Journal. And another. David Okafor, Bloomberg. By the time the sun set over Manhattan, Amora had made 7 calls. 7 journalists who'd covered Julian's rise, who'd written glowing profiles, who'd believed the story of the self-made visionary because that's the story he told so well. 7 people who were about to learn there was another side to the golden touch. The apartment door opened near midnight. Julian's footsteps in the hallway, familiar and foreign all at once. Amora was sitting in the living room, lights off, looking out at the city. "You're still up," he said, loosening his tie. "Couldn't sleep." He moved to the bar, poured himself scotch, Macallan 25, because Julian Whitmore didn't drink anything that didn't announce his wealth. "About today." The meeting got tense. "I want you to know it's not personal." "Not personal," Amora repeated softly. "It's business. You understand that, right? We're just untangling things. It doesn't have to be ugly." She turned to look at him, this man she'd loved, this stranger she'd married. "You're right," she said. "It doesn't have to be ugly." Relief crossed his face. "Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Sign the papers tomorrow, and we can both move forward." "Absolutely," Amora agreed. "Moving forward. That's exactly what I'm doing." Something in her tone made Julian pause, glass halfway to his lips. "What does that mean?" Amora stood, smoothed her hands down her jeans, casual clothes, not the armor of silk and pearls she wore to be Mrs. Whitmore. "It means I spent today doing what you taught me, Julian. I identified an asset that was being undervalued. I recognized an opportunity that everyone else had missed. And I positioned myself to maximize the return." Amora. The asset is the truth. The opportunity is transparency. And the return. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd worn in months. "We'll see. But I have a feeling it's going to be substantial." She walked past him, toward the bedroom. "What did you do?" Julian's voice had changed, lost its smooth confidence. Amora paused at the doorway. "Nothing illegal. Nothing unethical. I just made some calls. Told some stories. Shared some documentation." She looked back at him. "You know, the way you do when you're building something. When you're creating a narrative. When you're launching a new venture. You're bluffing." "Maybe," Amora said. "Or maybe you're about to learn the same lesson you just taught me, that there's a difference between what's legal and what's true. And the truth." She met his eyes one last time. "The truth doesn't need a dime of your money, Julian. It just needs daylight. Have you ever had to choose between staying silent to keep the peace, or speaking your truth knowing it would change everything? What did you do? Share your story in the comments below." The article dropped at 6:47 a.m. Amora knew the exact time because she was awake, had been awake all night, sitting in a hotel room in Soho that she checked into after leaving the Tribeca apartment. Her phone started buzzing at 6:48, and it didn't stop. Chicago Tribune, the woman behind the Golden Touch, how Amora Knight built half of Whitmore Enterprises from the shadows. Tasha had worked fast. The piece was thorough, devastating, and meticulously sourced. Email chains showing Amora's strategic recommendations that became Julian's innovations. Testimony from the design firm that handled the rebrand, confirming Amora as the primary visionary. A statement from Mrs. Kovac in Zagreb, on record, saying she'd invested specifically because of her trust in Amora's cultural intelligence and market analysis. And woven throughout, the story of a marriage that had been less partnership, more extraction. By 7:15, TechCrunch had published their follow-up, The Whitmore Empire, a case study in crediting the wrong founder. By 8:30, Bloomberg ran an opinion piece, "When supportive spouse is code for uncredited co-founder." By 9 a.m., #Whitmoregate was trending on Twitter. Amora's phone rang. "Patricia, have you seen?" "Yes." "Amora, this is..." Patricia's voice was caught between admiration and alarm. "This is going to change everything. Richard just called me. 3 times. Julian wants to meet." "I'm sure he does." "They're threatening to sue for defamation." "On what grounds?" Amora's voice was calm. "Every fact in those articles is documented. Every quote is sourced. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Patricia, you taught me that." A pause. Then Patricia laughed. Short, sharp, surprised. "You did your homework." "I learned from the best." Amora stood, walked to the hotel window. The city was waking up below her, millions of people starting their days, unaware that somewhere in a penthouse office, a man who'd built an empire on other people's work was watching that empire crack. What else did Richard say? That Julian is willing to renegotiate the settlement. How willing? He didn't specify numbers. But Amora, Patricia's tone shifted, became serious. "This media campaign is brilliant strategy, but it's also a nuclear option. You've made Julian look like a fraud. Men like him don't forget that. They don't forgive it." "Good," Amora said quietly. "I don't want his forgiveness. I want my life back." She hung up. By 10 a.m., the Wall Street Journal had picked up the story. By noon, it was on CNN. By 2 p.m., Whitmore Enterprises stock had dropped 8%, and 3 board members had called emergency meetings. Amora watched it unfold from her hotel room, laptop open, phone buzzing with messages from old colleagues, from investors she'd met at galas, from women she barely knew sending solidarity and sharing their own stories of vanished contributions and stolen credit. And then, at 3:17 p.m., her phone rang with a number she knew by heart. Julian. She let it ring 4 times before answering. Amora. His voice was tight, controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. "We need to talk. We talked yesterday. In the conference room. Remember? When you told me I wasn't getting a dime. Don't play games. You know what you've done." "I told the truth. Is the truth a game now?" Silence. "Then, you're destroying my company." "Your company," Amora repeated. "That's interesting phrasing. Because according to 7 major publications and about 40,000 Twitter users, it might not be entirely your company after all. Those articles they're biased. They're one-sided. They don't have my perspective." "Then give them your perspective, Julian. Hold a press conference. Explain how all those strategies just coincidentally emerged during the exact time period when I was working 16-hour days beside you. Explain how Mrs. Kovac invested in you despite barely speaking to you. Explain how." Amora. His voice dropped into something that might have been pleading in another man, but in Julian was just calculation. "What do you want?" There it was. The question she'd been waiting for. "I want you to meet me," she said. "Same conference room as yesterday. 6 p.m. Just you. No Richard. No lawyers. Just us." "Why?" "Because you asked me what I want, and I'm going to tell you. But I'm only saying it once, and I'm only saying it to you." Another pause. She could practically hear him thinking, weighing options, looking for the trap. "Fine," he said finally. 6 p.m. "But Amora? Whatever you think you're going to accomplish." "See you at 6, Julian." She ended the call. The conference room looked different at dusk. The same table, the same chairs, but the light had changed. Everything looked softer, more forgiving, which felt like a lie. Julian was already there when Amora arrived at precisely 6 p.m. He stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city he'd conquered, or thought he had. He turned when she entered. The confidence from yesterday was gone. In its place was something rawer. Anger, yes, but also confusion. Maybe even hurt, though Amora no longer trusted herself to read his emotions. She'd been wrong about them for 3 years. "You've made your point," he said without preamble. "My board is furious. My investors are concerned. I've had to cancel 2 meetings because the only thing anyone wants to discuss is whether I'm a fraud or just spectacularly ungrateful to my soon-to-be ex-wife. He took a step toward her. Was it worth it? This scorched earth approach. I haven't scorched anything, Amora replied calmly. I just turned on the lights. You wanted to humiliate me. No, Julian. I wanted to be seen. She moved to the table, but didn't sit. For 3 years, I stood next to you. I worked beside you. I built with you. And yesterday, you sat in this room and erased all of it. You reduced me to a pretty accessory who smiled at cameras. So I corrected the record. By going to the press? By airing our private life. Amora's laugh was sharp. Julian, you made our private life public the moment you built a fortune on my work and put only your name on it. Every profile, every article calling you a visionary, those were public. I just added context. Julian's jaw clenched. What do you want? Money? Fine. I'll triple the settlement. 25 million. I don't want your money. Then what? He spread his hands, and for the first time since she'd known him, Julian Whitmore looked truly lost. What the hell do you want, Amora? She pulled a folder from her bag, not divorce papers this time, but something else. She slid it across the table. What's this? A contract, she said. For the formation of a new company. Knight Strategies. Consulting firm specializing in market expansion, cultural intelligence, and strategic rebranding for tech companies entering international markets. Julian opened the folder, scanned the first page, looked up at her with disbelief. You want to start a competing firm? Not competing. Parallel. There's a difference. Amora moved closer, her voice steady. I spent 3 years learning from you, Julian. You're brilliant at identifying opportunities, at securing capital, at building infrastructure. Those are real skills. I'm not trying to take that from you. How generous. But I'm also brilliant at the things you're terrible at, reading people, understanding cultural nuance, building genuine relationships, seeing the human element in business strategy. And I'm done pretending those skills are less valuable than yours. She pointed to the contract. Page 7. You'll see a list of clients I've already secured. Mrs. Kovac is funding my first venture. The Singapore group wants to invest. I have meetings scheduled with 4 other international firms who specifically requested to work with me, not Whitmore Enterprises. Julian's face had gone pale. You're poaching my clients. I'm accepting opportunities from people who want to work with me. There's a difference. Amora's voice was soft but unyielding. And here's what I'm offering you, a choice. What choice? You can fight me. You can try to enforce non-competes that probably won't hold up given the circumstances. You can wage a legal war that will drag both of us through years of litigation while the press has a field day analyzing every detail of our marriage and your business practices. She paused. Or you can do something revolutionary. Which is? You can tell the truth. Amora gestured to the folder. Page 12. A proposed joint press release. We both acknowledge that Whitmore Enterprises was built through genuine partnership. We both take responsibility for its successes. We separate professionally but respectfully, with you continuing to run Whitmore Enterprises and me launching Knight Strategies as a complementary firm. Julian stared at her. You want me to publicly admit that I needed you. I want you to publicly admit that we built something together. Because we did, Julian. That part was real, even if you forgot it. And if I refuse? Amora met his eyes. Then I keep telling my story. And you keep watching your empire crack under the weight of the truth. Your choice. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 years of partnership and betrayal, ambition and love, building and breaking. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I did need you. He stopped, shook his head. I handled this wrong. Yesterday. All of it. Yes. Amora agreed. You did. But you're serious about this? Starting your own firm? I already started it. The LLC was filed 3 weeks ago, back when I first realized this marriage was ending. I was just waiting for the right moment to launch. Something that might have been respect flickered across Julian's face. You played this perfectly. I learned from you, Amora said. You taught me how to identify leverage, how to create pressure, how to negotiate from strength. I just never thought I'd have to use those lessons against you. Julian looked down at the contract, then back at her. And if I sign this? If we do the joint press release? What happens to us? We get divorced, Amora said simply. We divide everything fairly, and I mean actually fairly, not legally defensible fairly. And we both move forward as exactly what we are, two talented people who built something remarkable together and are now building remarkable things apart. You've thought of everything. I had a good teacher. Julian picked up the pen lying on the table, held it, then set it down again. I loved you. I know you don't believe that anymore, but I did. I believe you, Amora said, and meant it. You just loved your empire more. And I loved you more than I loved myself. We were both wrong. He picked up the pen again. And signed. The spring air in Manhattan carried the scent of possibility. Amora stood in the lobby of a glass high-rise in the Flatiron district, watching the installation crew mount the final letter of the sign above the elevator bank. Night Strategies. 6 months. 6 months since the article dropped. 6 months since Julian signed the contract in that conference room at dusk. 6 months since the joint press release that had shocked the business world, not because they were divorcing, but because they'd told the truth about it. Whitmore Enterprises was built through genuine partnership between Julian Whitmore and Amora Knight. As we transition from marriage to professional colleagues, we acknowledge the contributions each made to our shared success and look forward to our respective ventures. The statement had been simple, direct, and impossibly rare in a world where divorces usually meant destruction. It hadn't saved their marriage. Nothing could have done that. But it had saved something else, both of their futures. Ms. Knight. Amora turned to find her assistant, Jordan, 24, brilliant, a recent MBA graduate who turned down offers from 3 major firms to work for a startup with no track record and a founder who was still rebuilding her reputation. The team from Seoul is here for the video conference. And Mrs. Kovac called. She wants to move up the timeline on the Eastern European expansion. Amora smiled. Tell her I'll call her back in 20 minutes. And Jordan? We're going to need to hire 2 more analysts. Can you start pulling resumes? Already done. I'll have the shortlist on your desk by end of day. Jordan disappeared back into the office suite. 1,200 square feet on the 14th floor, nothing compared to Whitmore Enterprises' sprawling headquarters, but it was hers. Every desk, every contract, every success that would be built here would be built in the light, with her name on it, with credit where credit was actually due. The elevator chimed. Amora expected a delivery, maybe the new furniture for the conference room. Instead, Julian stepped out. They hadn't seen each other in person since the divorce was finalized 8 weeks ago. The settlement had been fair, genuinely fair. $28 million, which Amora had immediately invested in Knight Strategies. The Tribeca apartment went to Julian. The house in the Hamptons they'd sold and split the proceeds. Everything clean, everything documented, everything final. He looked different. Older, maybe, or just less certain. The confidence that had once seemed unshakable now looked like something he had to work at. Julian. Amora kept her voice neutral. What are you doing here? He glanced at the sign, then back at her. I heard you officially opened today. Wanted to congratulate you. That's kind of you. An awkward silence settled between them, 2 people who'd once shared everything now navigating the strange distance of being strangers with history. The sole contract, Julian said finally. I heard you closed it. That's impressive. They've been looking for the right partner for 2 years. I spent 3 weeks learning Korean business etiquette. Turned out understanding cultural context matters more than having the lowest bid. Amora said it without edge. Just fact. Julian nodded slowly. I'm realizing that more and more. He shifted his weight, looked uncomfortable in a way she'd never seen before. Actually, that's part of why I'm here. I wanted to ask you something. Okay. The venture capital group in Lagos. They approached me about expanding into West African markets, but... He trailed off, then met her eyes. I'm out of my depth. I don't understand the market. I don't have the cultural knowledge. I'd be going in blind, and that's a recipe for disaster. Amora waited. I was wondering if you'd consider consulting on the project. Night strategies. I mean. Official contract, market rates, everything above board. You'd get full credit for the strategy, and, he stopped himself. I'm not trying to exploit your expertise. I'm trying to learn how to actually collaborate. The right way this time. It would have been easy to say no. To tell him she'd moved on, that she didn't need Whitmore Enterprises as a client, that working together, even professionally, was too complicated. But Amora had learned something in the past 6 months. That holding on to anger felt like power but was actually just weight. And she was done carrying weight that wasn't hers. Send the proposal to Jordan, she said. We'll review it like any other potential client. If it makes sense for Night Strategies, we'll take the meeting. Relief crossed Julian's face. Thank you. And Amora? I've been thinking about what you said. About the difference between what's legal and what's true. And you were right. About all of it. His voice was quiet, sincere in a way she wasn't sure she'd ever heard from him. I convinced myself that because I could take credit, I should. That being the face of the company meant I was the company. But you built half of what Whitmore Enterprises became, and I tried to erase that because admitting it felt like admitting I wasn't enough on my own. Were you? Amora asked. Enough on your own. Julian considered this, really considered it. I was good at some things. Great at others. But no, I wasn't enough on my own. Nobody is. That's why partnerships exist. I just forgot that partnership means actually seeing your partner, not using them. It wasn't an apology, or rather, it was more than an apology. It was understanding. Growth. The kind of change that only comes from being forced to look at yourself clearly and not liking what you see. I appreciate you saying that, Amora said. I'm sorry, Julian added. For all of it. For taking you for granted. For the conference room. For, his voice cracked slightly. For saying you weren't getting a dime like you were trying to steal something that was never mine to begin with. Amora felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, that would take longer, might never fully come, but something like release. Like a door closing on a chapter that had defined her but no longer controlled her. We both made mistakes, she said. I made myself small to fit into your vision. You took advantage of that. We both have to live with our choices. Are you happy? Julian asked suddenly. Now, I mean. With all this. Amora looked around the lobby, at the sign with her name, at the office full of people she'd hired, at the business she'd built from nothing but expertise and truth and the willingness to bet on herself. Yeah, she said, and meant it completely. I really am. Julian nodded. Good. You deserve it. He turned toward the elevator, then paused. For what it's worth. I read all the articles. About women whose contributions get erased. And I saw myself in every story, in every man who told himself he'd earned everything alone. It was. He searched for the word. Humbling. Humbling is a good place to start, Amora said. The elevator arrived. Julian stepped in, held the door. The Lagos proposal. I'm serious about collaboration. Real collaboration, where everyone gets credit. Then we'll review it seriously, Amora promised. The doors closed, and he was gone. Amora took the elevator up to the 14th floor, walked into her office where her team was waiting, 5 brilliant people who'd believed in her vision, who joined a startup with no guarantees because they believed work should be credited to the people who actually did it. The Seoul conference call went perfectly. Mrs. Kovac's expansion was ahead of schedule. By end of day, Night Strategies had closed 3 new contracts and scheduled presentations with 4 potential clients. At 7 p.m., as the office emptied and the Manhattan skyline began to glow, Amora sat at her desk and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her messages, congratulations from former colleagues, opportunities from new contacts, and one message from her mother in Chicago. Saw the interview on Bloomberg. I'm so proud of you, baby. You took your power back. Amora smiled, typed back, I didn't take it back, Mama. I just remembered I never lost it. She set down her phone and looked out at the city, the same city where she'd once been Mrs. Julian Whitmore, invisible partner to a visible empire. But that woman was gone now, transformed not by anger or revenge, but by the simple revolutionary act of telling the truth and building something of her own. Her phone buzzed. A new email from an investor in Mumbai, interested in consulting services for their expansion into African markets. Amora opened her laptop and began to type. Outside, the city glowed with 1,000,000 lights, each one a story, each one a possibility. And for the first time in 3 years, Amora Knight was writing her own. 1 year later, the Forbes article came out on a Tuesday. The New Power Players: How Amora Knight Revolutionized Strategic Consulting and Why Everyone Wants to Work with Her. The piece featured a photo of Amora in her office, not standing in anyone's shadow, not smiling for someone else's camera, but centered in her own frame, building her own empire. Knight Strategies had expanded to 32 employees. They'd consulted on 47 international expansions across 4 continents. Revenue projections for the year had doubled, then tripled. And in a surprising twist that had made headlines in its own right, Knight Strategies had partnered with Whitmore Enterprises on the Lagos venture, a collaboration that had been so successful, so genuinely equitable, that it became a case study in business schools about what real partnership looked like. Amora kept a copy of that old divorce settlement in her desk drawer. Not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder of transformation. "She's not getting a dime," Julian had said. He'd been right. In a way. She hadn't gotten a dime from him. She'd gotten something infinitely more valuable, herself back. And that, as it turned out, was worth everything. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in taking something from someone else, it's in finally claiming what was always yours. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to diminish you? How did you reclaim your power? Share your journey in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for experiencing this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it.